to all learners out there. DepEd TV welcomes you to a day full of learning and discovery. I am Ma'am Con, your grade 7 science teacher. Come and join me. We are Sci Connected. How are you today? Are you ready for another day of learning? Before we start, make sure you have your pen, paper, and self-learning module. Let us first take a review of what we have tackled in our previous episode. To check your knowledge, let's play a short game. In this game called Anagram Scramble, all you need to do is to arrange the letters to come up with words relevant to our previous lesson. You will have enough time to answer each item. So now, pick up your pen and paper. Get ready! Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 1, it is solubility. If you get the unsaturated solution for number 2, then that's correct. Number 3, saturated solution. In lesson 1, you found out that insolubility of a solution, a solute can dissolve in another substance called solvent at a specific temperature and pressure. The resultant solution may be classified as unsaturated or saturated. The solution is unsaturated when it contains less solute than the maximum amount it can dissolve at a given temperature. On the other hand, the solution that contains the maximum amount of solute dissolved by a given amount of solvent is called a saturated solution. And now, what we have for lesson 2 is another resultant solution, which we will identify as the supersaturated solution. But before we proceed to the lesson proper, here are the learning goals for today's lesson. Number 1, define supersaturated solution. Number 2, compare and contrast saturated and supersaturated solution. And number 3, cite the importance of unsaturated, saturated, and supersaturated solution. To start with, I have prepared a pre-assessment activity in which you need to answer the questions that will flash on your screen. Please write down on your paper only the letter of your choice for each item. Hold up your pen and paper now as we begin with the activity. Number 1. Which of the following best describes a supersaturated solution? A. Has a more amount of solvent. B. Has less solute than the solvent. C. Has less solvent than the solute. D. Has a more amount of solute and solvent than the solute's solubility. The supersaturated solution is a solution that contains more than the maximum amount of solute that can dissolve in a given quantity of solvent. So, the correct answer is letter D. Number 2. What do you call the solution that contains more solute than a saturated solution under the same condition? A. Solution. B. Saturated. C. Unsaturated. D. Supersaturated. The correct answer is letter D. Supersaturated. Number 3. Jessica wanted to ferment a fish. What type of salt solution does she need to prepare to conduct the fermentation? A. Saturated. B. Suspension. C. Unsaturated. D. Supersaturated. If Jessica is to conduct fish fermentation, she needs to prepare a supersaturated salt solution. So, the answer is letter D. How's the pre-assessment? Did the questions make you wonder or excited to learn about the science behind its answers? Later, we will find this out. For now, let us take this short activity. Study the table flashing on the screen and answer the questions following it through. Please take note that you only have 10 seconds to answer each item. Get your pen and paper as we will start now. Note that 35 grams of table salt will form a saturated solution in 100 milliliters of water. Number 1. Which of the solutions given in the table is unsaturated? Time's up! The answer is solution 1. It is unsaturated because it only contains 20 grams of salt in 100 milliliters of water. Number 2. Which of the solution is saturated? Considering that 35 grams of table salt will form a saturated solution in 100 milliliters of water, and that solution too contains the same amount of salt and water, that makes it correct answer. Number 3. Which of these will make a supersaturated solution? Time's up! Since solution 3 has the highest amount of table salt and that it exceeds the amount that can dissolve in 100 milliliters of water, therefore, it is what can make the supersaturated solution. Congratulations! To better understand the supersaturated solution, let's make an actual one. Does it excite you? Well, it is experiment time with Ma'am Con. Materials needed are sugar, water, beaker with 250 milliliters capacity, stirring rod, alcohol lamp, tripod or iron stand, wire gauze, and matchstick. Caution. Use the laboratory instruments carefully, especially if fire is involved, to avoid damage and accident during the experiment. Parental supervision is advised. Number 1. Prepare a 250 milliliter beaker and stirring rod. Number 2. Fill the beaker with 100 milliliters of water. Number 3. Slowly add 100 grams of sugar to 100 milliliters of water and stir it. Observe! What happened to the solution? The solution is uniform in appearance. The sugar dissolved in water. Fourth step, add another 100 grams of sugar to the sugar solution from step 3. There are some undissolved particles of sugar in the solution. Did the particles dissolve in water? What have you observed other than that? Step 5. Heat the solution and continue adding 100 grams of sugar. Do the particles still dissolve in water? Does the water change in color? The particles of sugar dissolved in water, and the water changed its color. Step 6. Add another 60 grams of sugar without heating the solution. Stir and observe what will happen next. What do you call the solution that contains more dissolved solute than a saturated solution does? The solution that contains more dissolved solute than a saturated solution is called supersaturated. Step 7. Let your substance cool down its temperature. What have you observed in the solution as it cooled? There are no crystals formed as it cooled. Now, it's science fact time with Ma'am Con. Did you know that cornea is a part of our body that takes oxygen directly from the air? The cornea is the clear front surface of the eye that allows light to enter the eye for vision. It has no blood supply, so it directly takes oxygen from the air rather than from the blood. The oxygen first dissolves in tears, then diffuses throughout the cornea to keep it healthy. Amazing, right? That is today's short science fact with Ma'am Con. Back to our lesson. The solution is saturated when you add more amount of solute to a solution and get to notice that some particles left at the bottom of the solution. It is the solution in which the amount of solute is equal to the solute solubility at a given volume and temperature. When simultaneously heating while continually adding a solute to the solution, the solute will still dissolve. At this point, a solution gets saturated at a higher temperature. Allowing the solution to cool down at lower temperature, crystals starts to form. Then, a solution is supersaturated. It is a solution in which the amount of solute is more than the solute solubility at a given volume and temperature. This state is unstable, which by slight agitation causes precipitation. In the process, some of the solutes will come out of the solution. Once the precipitation occurs, the result is a saturated solution. Another example of a supersaturated solution is sodium acetate trihydrate. Sodium acetate trihydrate is a hydrate that contains sodium acetate. When a sodium acetate trihydrate is poured onto another solid crystal, it will recrystallize. This is used as ingredient to enhance sour taste, adjust pH, and for preservation in food. The picture shows the solubility of a solution when it is unsaturated, saturated, and supersaturated, including its concentration. Now, let's do this exercise. Classify whether the solutions in the table are unsaturated, saturated, or supersaturated. Write your answers on a sheet of paper. Okay, let's begin! The first solution has 36 grams of solute in 100 milliliters of solvent at 25 degrees Celsius. Is it unsaturated, saturated, or supersaturated? Well, it is unsaturated. The second solution is 80 grams of solute in 100 milliliters of water at 25 degrees Celsius. Is it unsaturated, saturated, or supersaturated? You are right if your answer is saturated. The third solution is 150 grams of solute in 100 milliliters of solvent at 50 degrees Celsius. Is it unsaturated, saturated, or supersaturated? If your answer is supersaturated, you are correct! A job well done! Congratulations! We use solutions every day. Iced coffee is an example of unsaturated solution due to the reason that less amount of sugar was dissolved on it. Carbonated drinks are examples of solution that is saturated with carbon. It may leach calcium from your bones, causing osteoporosis. It may also harm the enamel of your teeth, irritate your stomach, or even cancer. The best example of supersaturated solution are honey and different kinds of candies. Knowing unsaturated, saturated, and supersaturated solutions may serve as a guide to cooking meals, preparing drinks, and avoid solutions that may harm your health. Now, let's test your mastery of the lesson. Read the questions carefully that will be flashed on the screen. Write down on your paper the letter of your answer for each item. I believe you are now ready, so let's start! Number 1. What do you call the solution that contains more solute than a saturated solution under the same conditions? A. Solution. B. Saturated. C. Unsaturated. D. Supersaturated. The solution that contains more solute than a saturated solution under the same condition is supersaturated. If your answer is letter D, you are correct! Number 2. Which of the following solutions contain the maximum amount of a solute dissolved by a given amount of a solvent? A. Solution. B. Saturated. C. Unsaturated. D. Supersaturated. The solution that contains the maximum amount of a solute dissolved by a given amount of a solvent is saturated. If your answer is letter B, then you got it right! Number 3. What type of solutions can we make from 200 grams of solute dissolved in 100 milliliters of solvent at 50 degrees Celsius? A. Solution. B. Saturated. C. Unsaturated. D. Supersaturated. Given that the amount of solute is more than the solute's solubility at a given volume and temperature, then the correct answer is letter D, supersaturated. Number 4. What do you do to make a solute dissolve quickly in a solvent? A. Add water. B. Add sugar. C. Heat the solution. D. Freeze the solution. The best way to dissolve quickly a solute in a solvent is to heat the solution. If your answer is letter C, good job! You are right! Number 5. When is the solution considered as saturated? A. When crystals formed. B. When you need to stir it more. C. When no additional solute dissolves. D. When two materials combined to create a clear liquid. A solution is saturated when no additional solute dissolves in it. If your answer is letter C, great! You got the right answer. As we get through our lesson for today, I congratulate you as you are now ready to move forward with our next lesson. Now, it's time to be connected with one of SciConnected question senders on DepEd TV page. Our question sender is Cha, 17 years old from Luksuhin Integrated School, Alfonso, Cavite. Her question is, what is the universe made up of? According to National Geographic, the visible universe, including the Earth, the Sun, and other stars and galaxies, is made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons bonded together in atoms. The rest of the universe appears to be of a mysterious, invisible substance called a dark matter, which is 25%, and a force that repels gravity known as a dark energy, which is 70%. Scientists have not yet observed dark matter directly. It's completely invisible to light and any other forms of electromagnetic radiation. But scientists are confident that it exists because of the gravitational effects it appears to have on galaxies and other clusters. Thank you so much for your question, Cha. I hope that everyone gained additional information from it. If you have science questions, simply post it at Sci Connected on DepEd TV page. Kindly follow this format. I hope that you've learned new lessons today. Thank you so much for sticking with me and see you on the next episode. Learning does not stop here. If you want to watch my previous episode or a replay of this episode, simply go to DepEd TV official YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to receive notifications every time we release a new video. Again, this is Ma'am Maricon and Samin scientifically saying, think critically, do things differently, and that develop your ability.